Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Rockefeller Center, welcome to tonight's Rocky Watch event. We are so pleased to welcome home 3 Dartmouth alums who will be discussing President Biden's first 100 days. Before we get started, a couple of Zoom details. Ask your questions at any time by using the Q&A button. And here's an insider tip. The earlier you ask your question, the greater the likelihood that it gets answered. To access Zoom's closed captioning feature, navigate to the live transcript button and select show subtitle. And if you don't see that option, look under the more button. And finally, when you leave tonight's webinar, you will encounter a survey. It is a very big help to us if you would take the time to answer the 3 short questions. Thank you. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our host for the evening, Janos Marton, National Director of Dream Corps Justice. Janos is a member of the class of 2004 and was a 2-time student body president while he was at Dartmouth. After leaving Dartmouth, he earned his law degree from Fordham Law School. He's been involved in many social justice causes, including the successful campaign to close Rikers Island. In 2020, he ran for Manhattan District Attorney on a platform to use prison as a last resort. And today, he's leading a team at Dream Corps focused on closing prison doors and opening doors of opportunity. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Janos, for leading tonight's discussion, and welcome back home.
Well, thank you very much. I always am very excited to come back and participate, even if it is just digitally with Rocky events. Rocky played a really important role in my time at Dartmouth, and I learned an awful lot. And I hope that you all learn a lot from tonight's conversation. We're going to be talking about the first 100 days with 2 guests who know an awful lot about what it means to operate in Washington at the highest levels, but are also young alums, so not that distantly removed from the students who may be watching this program. Jim, I'm going to ask you to turn your camera on first. I'm going to be asking Jim to share a little bit about his work, and then Amanda to share a little bit about hers before we dive into a conversation around the first 100 days. We'll definitely set aside time for all of you to ask questions, so feel free to drop questions once we actually get the conversation going. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Jim Baehr. I've known Jim for a very long time. His class of 2005, served as special assistant to the president in the Domestic Policy Council in Donald Trump's White House as the lead policy advisor on veterans issues. He serves as a major in the Marine Reserve Corps and has deployed to Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, and done a lot of really important work for our country abroad. He served as a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Orleans, and like I said, graduated in 2005. So Jim, I'd love you to share a little bit about your work now, and soon enough, we'll get to the first 100 days.
Absolutely. Well, it's an honor to be here, Janos, among such great friends. I have the fondest memories of my time at Dartmouth, and I really appreciate all of you for inviting me tonight. I think there were a number of folks from Dartmouth who played a role in the administration, and I just appreciate your highlighting different views across the spectrum here. My path to the White House was interesting. I didn't end up there until 2018, so I spent the last 18 months there. I was, like Janos said, in the Marine Corps Reserves. I was deployed in 2018. I got back from deployment, was going through some transition after leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office, when I received a cryptic message from a friend who was in the White House asking, hey, does anyone know anything about veteran policy or want to work in the White House? So I sent in my resume, not knowing what to expect. Within a week, I was up in the West Wing interviewing with Joe Grogan, who was the former head of the Domestic Policy Council. And Joe looks at me, he's this brash, brisk Irishman, and he says, you know, you really want to come here? This is an impossible job. Veteran policy is difficult. The VA is intractable. You know, you need to think about whether you want to do this because this is impossible. But if you haven't noticed, the president really cares about this constituency and this group. So I want you to go home and think about whether you actually want this and let me know next week. So I went home and I thought about it for a minute and I said, you know what? It's a great challenge. Let's do it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Next up, Amanda Brown Lierman. You can turn your camera on and join us. Excellent. Amanda, it's hard to believe that the campus once held all 3 of us in this space. Amanda's had a remarkable career since graduating from Dartmouth. She's currently the managing director of Supermajority, a new organization with the goal of building 21st century women's movement that is multi-generational and power building. Prior to that, she served as the political and organizing director for the Democratic National Committee during a very successful, I might add, 2018 midterm cycle. Upon graduating Dartmouth, Amanda worked as an organizer. She was part of the Obama campaign team, the transition team, the Obama White House, Department of Energy, and Rock the Vote. So a lot of stories, I'm sure, accumulated over the years. But want to share a little bit about your background, Amanda, before we turn to first 100 days?
Yeah, definitely. I also consider myself a child of the Rockefeller Center and think of Sadhna as a second mom, which I think many of us who have spent time at the Rockefeller Center share. Mother's Day is coming up, Sadhna, so you have lots of gifts coming your way. But I am a class of 2007, but during my sophomore year at Dartmouth, my best friend actually was shot and killed like the first week of our sophomore summer. And she was a fellow Dartmouth person. She was this like badass from Berkeley, California, who sort of had like a very strong opinion about all things, and really helped me come out of my own shell with my own like political beliefs, likely over, Pong games and frat basements and things like that. But she was tragically killed, and I really didn't know what to make of it my sophomore summer, and sort of turned to the Rocky Center to help me like figure out what to do with all of my, and like channel the sort of emotions that I was feeling, and had the opportunity to go through the civic skills training program, and then come to DC to actually work for then Senator Barack Obama in the Senate office, and had a pretty interesting experience on the Hill. I remember the like final paper I had to write for the Rocky Center to receive the final portion of the grant. I was pretty cynical around about how government worked. And it's funny to reflect on the sort of cynicism I had about the government at that time in 2005 compared to, where we were just a couple of years ago and even now. But I'm really grateful personally for the experiences that Dartmouth, just the lessons I've learned through opportunities that I had. Many thanks to Dartmouth. And it's, blown into what I never thought to be a career in organizing for me, and have certainly a ton of stories to share, a ton of, reflections even on these past 100 days, having been in and served during the first 100 days of the Obama administration, and how, it's a really tough time for new administrations to come in. So I'm also looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic.
Also, we have a friend, because I did just have a baby. So this is also a little bit of a challenge for my I don't know, like speaking.
I'm going to take advantage of the fact that there's no one crying at the moment and stick with you, Amanda.
Perfect.
So I'm sure many students watching this know that the concept of the first 100 days was coined by FDR during a highly successful first few months of his administration rescuing America from the Great Depression. 76 laws passed. It seems almost unfathomable now. But compared to modern times, I think the general assessment is that this has been a pretty successful first 100 days. You've had COVID relief, you've had the vaccine getting out. But tell me, I mean, as somebody who went through it, how would you assess the first 100 days beyond the sort of cursory things we see in the headlines?
Yeah, when I was like preparing for this, there were sort of three things that I was thinking about. One, just Biden's character, which is like not necessarily worth dwelling, because I agree that there's not, I think it would be hard to debate the fact that Biden has really restored the integrity of the Oval Office of this administration. He is such a man of the people and for the people, and just has this striking amount of compassion and a respect for the office of the presidency, which personally I have been missing for a long time. I can like now get back on Twitter without having a panic attack every single time, knowing that there's a man who's really, his like driver of ambition is his empathy for people. And I think you can see like there could not be a more opposite person to Donald Trump than there is in Joe Biden. The second thing I would point out is just like governance, we'll use that word. Campaigns are one thing and to govern is another. And Joe Biden is at his best while governing. We can debate and have lots of interesting conversations about Joe Biden as a candidate on the campaign trail. Feel so much empathy for Jenna Mellon Dillon having to, manage him on the campaign trail, but he's really, built, I would say, given the realities of the pandemic and coming out of the sort of aftermath of the 4 years of Trump, he's handled this transition to governance pretty beautifully. We were like with a crisis that seemed to have no bottom when he first came into the administration. People were out of jobs, families, small business owners were suffering. There's a generation of children, my own included, that we had no idea when they would go back to school. And it really does feel like we're recovering. You can see sort of the light at the end of the tunnel now. And we'll probably fail at the current numbers, but it's something like 200 million shots have been put into people's arms. 161 million people now have gotten a $1,400 or more stimulus check in their bank accounts. And you're seeing businesses actually start to open, grandparents being able to see their families for the first time. My dad flew here to see his own grandchildren for the first time in a year and a half just last week. And you can really feel the country getting back on track. If I were to be on real message right now, I would say, hashtag back on track, hashtag build back better, which I think is one thing that is also worth noting, that Joe Biden didn't just come in, with, he came in with a mandate to solve the immediate crisis that was at hand, but he was laser focused and is laser focused on one thing, not himself, but the health and economic security of the American people. And there isn't such a thing as returning to normal at this point. I really do think that he is helping us come out of this pandemic stronger than when we went in. And in my current role leading Supermajority, we obviously talk about that from the woman perspective and how do we, gain women's equality finally and have a real conversation about that. And the fact that we're having some once in a lifetime conversations right now about things like paid leave that 5 years ago, even in the Obama administration, we couldn't have this conversation. And I think it's opened the doors to, put forth some real progressive policy and actually create some real change.
Amazing, thank you. You got that all in just as things are
right
in your lap. So Jim, I'm going to bring you in, and I think it's sort of indisputable that some things are going very well, but perhaps the critique from the right is about some of the very things Amanda touted as good things, concern about the future. But I'd love to have you just weigh in on is that analysis right? Is the first 100 days, has it been pretty solid? And what do you think of where we are now and where we're going?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when assessing the success of the first 100 days, we have to look at what the message and theme was during the campaign. And obviously Biden's was reclaiming the soul of the nation. And he won with surprising support from a lot of conservatives, pro-life evangelicals for Biden. 10% of his voters were 2016 Trump voters, according to CBS's exit polls. His percentage of liberal support went 46% of Clinton supporters were liberal. Only 42% of the folks who polled for Biden were liberal, and 17% of his supporters were pro-life. So I think that he was emphasizing unity. I think he saw stronger support in the suburbs because of that. And so the question is he achieving the unity? And I think that, it's fair to say that he isn't. And whether that's just because our partisan tribal allegiances are so strong, I think that's the kind of critique that he's not achieving the unity. In terms of policy, we see sort of some of the same trends we've seen over the last few administrations. We see less laws being passed, fewer laws passed than all but 3 presidents since 1930. He's passed 11 bills, according to 538. More executive orders than any president before. He's passed 40 executive orders by this time. Trump was 33 at 100 days. More revocations of prior executive orders than any other president, with 39 revocations. I just have to wait every day and I see another revocation of something worked on in Domestic Policy Council. But fortunately for most of my work, veterans, he's kept all those policies. The next highest, though, beyond him was Ronald Reagan with 18. So we see some of these trends, and I don't think these are necessarily just Biden's fault or Trump's fault or anybody's fault. They're trends in our politics that's more partisan than ever. So he has a 54% approval rating today in terms of political support, which is higher than Trump certainly at this time, but lower than almost everyone else's at this time. The partisan gap is even bigger for President Biden than it was for President Trump, 85-point partisan gap compared to 77 for Trump. So I would just offer that if the goal is unity, we're still struggling. In terms of other accomplishments, I also think that, Ross Duth had a very interesting theory that a lot of what President Biden is pushing forward are plans that were started by President Trump. Obviously, a lot of folks didn't like President Trump's style and demeanor, but a lot of the policies that he pushed, whether it's Operation Warp Speed, whether it's paid family leave, which Ivanka worked on quite a bit, direct payments to folks, rental assistance, eviction protection, loans to small businesses, those policies have continued. And other policies such as getting us out of forever wars and noting, the strong competition we are with China, I think have continued as well. So I think there's surprising continuation in policies between these administrations that I think, is a bit surprising, but is perhaps not surprising when we think that there is a real populist sense in the country that, blue collar folks need help. And that's why many people attribute to President Trump's victory to. And so I think that President Biden is wise to focus on those independent blue collar workers.
Thanks, Jim. And I'm going to ask a question a little bit to both of you about partisanship, because I think that is sort of the key prism by which we should decide how the next couple of years are going to go. But I also want to take advantage of the fact that both of you have this inside vantage point that you've seen. I assume most of the people watching this, read the news, they watch cable TV, but I would love for you first, Jim, and then you, Amanda, to share, what is a perspective, having been inside the building, that what is perhaps a challenge that most people don't recognize when they think about governing from the White House, that you think maybe Biden's going through right now? Maybe you can share something that you experienced. But yeah, what's something that you picked up on during your time there that you wouldn't have known otherwise?
I would say something that really surprised me is even widely supported bipartisan policies, how difficult the policymaking process is. In veteran policy, one of my primary initiatives was reducing veteran suicide. This is obviously something everyone can get behind and support. We did end up passing a bill unanimously, but to get to that point was just a tremendous amount of challenge. Our policy document, which was the Prevents Roadmap to Reduce Veteran Suicide, went through over 6,000 changes because of the size of the bureaucracy. It's very difficult to get policies accomplished. Even if you do get policy accomplished across the finish line, the enactment of the policy is so crucial. And I think this is something that we failed at in the last administration in terms of personnel as policy. A lot of folks who were part of the bureaucratic system didn't support our policies. So it was very difficult to actually get them enacted and move forward for the long term. And that's the caution for these executive orders, right? They have less permanency than actually pushing laws through, actually doing the hard work of getting folks to agree on something and getting folks to enact it. So I guess I was just surprised by how difficult that was. Obviously, President Trump was known for being a disruptive president, but we came up against the same challenges that any administration did in terms of trying to get stuff across the finish line.
Gotcha. And I think, it's something that I've certainly recognized, that it feels like every few years we're just undoing executive orders and redoing them. And I wonder how long that cycle will continue. Amanda, what about yourself? I mean, you came in a truly tumultuous time, if I recall. What was it like being behind the scenes that people wouldn't have picked up on?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I started a funny story actually of how I actually started at the White House, but I started the day after inauguration in 2009. And I remember getting a call actually from Patrick Gaspard, who was my boss, that morning being like, "Are you coming to work?" And I was like, I didn't realize we were starting so soon. It's like total freaking chaos at the beginning. So just putting myself back in that, I remember walking into the West Wing where my office was, and literally there, all the furniture was displaced. There were keys on the keyboards that were not there. It was a disaster. I didn't have a working email address for 3 weeks, I think. always joke and tease Patrick that God forbid, like I was like, you will have to come save me because I have so much in my Gmail from those early days, and I refuse to have my Gmail, you know, like taken by Congress at some point. But I think it's worth noting just how like it takes a lot of work to get things going and get, you know, assess where you are. Sort of, you know, the transition can only do so much of that sort of real audit while they're not in places. And this transition, I think, was really hard for people trying to get access to certain things that they needed to really understand and uncover sort of like the depths of the last 4 years and how to help us come out of this, if you will. And I think one of the things that I reflect on right now is just how Joe Biden obviously came in, and to your point, James, with a lot of executive orders and actions, but he also came in with a plan to build a team. And I think some of the smartest leaders are those that know that they have to put good people and surround themselves with good people. And he has done that starting at the top with people like Kamala Harris, and representation does matter. Just being able to see even Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi at the joint address last week, like that is so meaningful. But the administration is really marked by its diversity right now. And he has, you know, put in place its statutory cabinet faster than any administration since President Reagan. I think he's nominated something like over 200 people to serve in Senate confirmed roles across the executive branch, which is also more nominees than any past administration had done by the 100-day mark. And these are incredible people. Janet Yellen, first woman to be the Secretary of the Treasury, Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, first Native American to even serve as a cabinet secretary. And you have a ton of those success stories. And then I actually saw a friend yesterday because of science. I was able to get out and see people in real life again who runs the Office of Presidential Personnel. And, you know, they've already hired and appointed 1,500 people to serve across the administration. And they have such incredible numbers about who those people are. 58% of them are women, 18% represent or identify as Black, 15% Latino, 15% API, or 3% Middle Eastern, North African, 2% American Indian, 14% LGBTQ, 4%, that's 3% folks that identify as having a disability, 15% were the first in their families to go to college, 32% are naturalized citizens or the children of immigrants even. And I think, you know, you want to build a team that actually reflects those that are closest to the pain and bring those most deeply impacted by the policies to conversations about solutions. And he's done that with even looking at, you know, the Department of Labor, the agency, which is completely on the front lines right now of getting people back to work. And again, a bias just in the sense of the work that I do, women have been so disproportionately affected by this pandemic. Nearly 70% of the labor appointees right now are women, and that, you know, they're solving, you know, having conversations and putting forth solution to bring us back. And I would say it's difficult when you first come in. I don't think you really have real perspective on sort of the chaos that you're walking into, regardless of a, you know, partisan sort of transition. It's just like, it's a major transition to go through, and it is really hard to put together a team so quickly of good people. And so want to also acknowledge that for him as part of the success.
Great, thank you. So for my next question, I'd love to sort of think about where we go post first 100 days. And I appreciate people have been submitting questions already. Sophie submitted a question that I'm going to incorporate into this one a little bit. You know, you worked on the Obama administration, where Mitch McConnell famously said his goal was to make Obama one-term president. You know, under President Trump, you saw a lot of investigations, you know, immediate denials of the legitimacy of his presidency. Even during COVID, it seemed like the two parties couldn't come together. And I think, you know, I wonder from both of your perspectives, both wearing the hats, you know, both based on your previous experience and the hats you wear now, I mean, is there, in the long run, you think, a return to not like constant bipartisanship, but even any issue where the two parties can actually work together? Or are we in a situation where politics just sort of dictates that, one party in the White House being successful is bad for the other party's political fortunes. I was not a government major, sorry to anybody watching. I was a history major. And there were times not that long ago where there were certain issues that were sort of consensus issues. We're going to work on this to make America a stronger country, even though we disagree about these other things. And so, Amanda, I'll go with you first. I mean, like, what is your sense? How fatalistic or optimistic are you about this really divisive partisanship being just central to our politics moving forward?
I think, yeah, there's so many ways to sort of tackle this question. One immediate thought is just like, if there is anyone to do it, it is Joe Biden. To James' point, just in terms of being able to speak to the middle class, the working class, put forth that sort of agenda for people to identify with and relate to, and talk about jobs even. That is why Joe Biden became, the Democratic nominee. It is why he won the White House, because it's an appealing message to the masses right now, as it should be. And he has a history of bipartisanship himself. And I think one of the things, even for a person like me who might be a little bit more on the spectrum, leaning a little bit more left than our moderate Joe Biden, who I'm like, he will never not be a moderate, and have had that conversation several times with folks in the sort of progressive community right now. He is somebody that wants to lead as a bipartisan leader. I think there's the rhetoric that every president, sort of speaks of, I'm a leader for all people, but I really do think that Joe Biden has that conviction, and he's been saying that from the very beginning. He also has the relationships on the Hill to do that, just having served in such so many different capacities over so many different decades, if you will, which is maybe the pro to him being so old. But he does have those relationships to pull off some of these conversations. And so there's that part of it. And then there's the more interesting or more recent sort of conversation even about the filibuster and DC statehood, and how that would sort of change the way in which we're able to, that sort of democracy reform, if you will, would allow for, in some ways, Democrats to sort of play, James, don't freak out, the sort of game that Republicans have played all the time when they have power, and they just use the power that has been given to them. And I would say, if anything, Democrats sort of sometimes like play too nicely in the sandbox, or want to be friends with people, and don't necessarily always leverage those opportunities. And sort of our own internal politics right now with Manchin and Sinema, and what that means for what we'll be able to do, I think is it'll be an interesting, year ahead in that sense, and the roles that those folks play, and sort of how bold are Democrats willing to be right now. I think that was a real concern of Democrats, and certainly of the progressive community, for Joe Biden coming in, how he is a moderate at the end of the day, and he wants, I think, he does want to reach across the aisle, and build leverage those relationships to have, and to James's point, continue conversations like we're having around paid leave right now. And yeah, I would say I am optimistic about that, because it is Joe Biden. I'm not sure that I would say that if there were anybody else sort of sitting in the position or the office of the presidency right now. And at the same time, I do have a healthy level of cynicism about it, just given the sort of aggression, if you will, by what it feels like by the Republicans to be opposed to anything just for the sake of being opposed to it. And even the criticisms right now around the jobs plan that Joe Biden is putting forth, like, how are you opposed to creating jobs again, right? I think also at this point, sorry, I will give you the floor, James, but one of the other things that I think is important to reflect on is, like, everyone is on message better, more so than we've been in the past. I think that is one thing that we've been learned from this past even election. There was a huge coordinated act to make sure that Democrats were organized around the sort of communication with this election, and trying to control the narrative. And I think that has had some positive effect, or sort of benefits, if you will, to Democrats all being able to say one thing. Republicans have always been really good at that, if you will. And you're like, that will continue to play out. And it's sort of just like a test of who, not who breaks first, but just like, yeah, is there a way for us to come together? And I think that some of the issues right now demand that.
Thanks, Amanda. So Jim, yeah, I imagine you agree that some of the issues of today demand that. Do you think it can happen? Is Joe Biden the person to pull it off?
Well, I think there was a lot of hope among all those people I mentioned that he would be. I don't think we've seen it yet. I mean, the one thing Republicans overwhelmingly support is infrastructure, but they're offering, close to $1 trillion infrastructure bill. And if that's not good enough for the president to say, okay, I'd rather have more votes and more support, we'll see. But, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, you and I have talked about this, Janos. I mean, everybody feels like the other party is so well organized. Everybody feels the other party is doing a great job. Republicans are the biggest critics of the Republican Party. I mean, it's just a hot mess at all times. And unfortunately, I just think it's tough because we feel like for the last, 50, 60 years, we have no control over any institution in this country, whether it's education or media or anything else. And it's sort of been a slow roll towards more state, more government and more expensive government. So, I take the compliment, but I feel like Republicans do not feel like we're particularly good at any of this. I will say I just have concerns based on social media and kind of increasing partisanship because people are rewarded for it. The biggest fundraisers in the party are the ones who are the most animated about never compromising, never going to give in. They're the ones who raise the most money and they get the most attention on social media. So I worry. And also I think there's a book called The Righteous Mind about how we fall into these partisan groups and we validate our own views rather than seeking out other views. And I think that's something that's so great about Dartmouth and any college or any institution where you're forced to be around people who have different views. And it's very hard to do that in our society now because we live in a place where our civic fabric is very strained. We don't have commonalities where we go to the same place where we hang out with the same people. We usually just kind of get into our echo chambers. So I don't have great encouragement that this path is going to change or the trend is going to change absent some significant exterior threat or something else happening.
Like a pandemic?
Even the pandemic. Although I will have you know that I was looking at Biden's executive orders and his mask order, which obviously some more libertarian types don't like, garners a majority of Republican support as well. So, there might have been more commonality on that. But again, the media benefits from emphasizing discord and drama. If it bleeds, it leads. So they're going to put that out there.
It's pretty interesting. Sorry, Janos, just to commentate on or react to one of the things, James, just about you feeling like you don't control many things, because I do think that you all have been, I will give you a lot of sort of applause, like credit for even the way in which you might not dominate the White House right now, but just the way in which you control state legislatures and cities and, just like that sort of level and judicial seats right now does put the Republicans in a position to sort of control some of the aspects of lives of everyday Americans in a way that is more maybe felt than like what's, covered on MSNBC or Fox News at night, So I'm just reacting to that because it definitely feels like there is more sort of opportunity with the sort of positions that some Republicans are holding. And then the other thing too is just who is the Republican Party of today with the sort of divide of like Trump versus the Romney Democrats and what that just the makeup of the party even.
For sure. I have my own theory on why both people on the left and right are constantly disappointed, it's because I think there are people who are really driven into politics by passion and a desire to change the country for whatever perspective they come from, and both run into the professional political class, whether it's at the state or federal or local level. And that's why people, whether they're on the left or the right, following time in government, really feel like they got to accomplish a smaller fraction of what they intended to. I would love for people to keep submitting questions. I will turn to your questions in just a moment. This is my final question, and it's Dartmouth centric. So Amanda, I'll start with you. You obviously came into politics while you were at Dartmouth. What is something that you learned? What is a valuable lesson about politics you learned through Dartmouth and Rocky? And what is a truth that turned out to be wrong once you actually got into the game of working in the political world?
Yeah, James sort of mentioned this earlier, which is it's really true about, like, this is just a life lesson that's not necessarily based on politics or a career in politics, but just people matter and relationships matter a lot. And it's sometimes you like forget about when you're in, I don't know, a basement playing Pong, or you're at Baehr getting food, or running over to the hop, or like in X person's history class. Those relationships that you're building, they will last you and like go well into your future. And even just thinking about, the time that the three of us spent on campus, like who would have thought that we would be in a conversation like this in just 15 years, right? But you continue to run into people, you will continue to work with people, they will be leading organizations, they will be making decisions, they will be, in great positions of authority throughout the government even. And so just knowing that, those relationships that you're building right now will really matter, not just during your time at Dartmouth, but for the long term. And in terms of something that I thought I knew about politics when I was at Dartmouth, I'll just say, I think I was definitely more cynical about politics and government when I was at Dartmouth, actually. I think probably based on my experience as an intern in the Senate in 2005, where it just felt like complete gridlock. And I also had the ego of a sophomore who I was like, why are you asking me to give a tour of the Capitol? And like, why do I have to open mail? And sort of resented that experience a little bit, which is, yeah, I'm not proud of that. So just being honest about that, but was really cynical about whether or not you could make change at that level. So much so that I actually left that experience being like, if I want to create any sort of actual change in this country, I need to go to law school, and I need to go like do it that way, as opposed to work the political system. And I would say now, like I can reflect on that and just say that I was wrong, in the sense that government is all about people working for other people and helping, make the government work for people. And it's people like us that are in those positions. And they're just people. They're driven and motivated by a passion to solve a crisis, or, help address a solution, help make life better for people, no matter what that, looks like based on your sort of particle leaning. And it's people at the end of the day. And I do have a lot more sort of faith and understanding, even compassion, for the people that are sitting in those positions of power, and am more optimistic and hopeful about the fact that when you put good people into those positions, you can in fact make the government work better.
Well said. I completely agree on the importance of people and relationships navigating through difficult situations. For those keeping score, also, that was 2 Pong references so far, and 1 dig against law school, which I may or may not agree with. You know what? I'll probably side with that one for now. Jim, what about you? Talk about how Dartmouth shaped you for better or worse in this world.
No, I can't. I couldn't agree more with Amanda. It really is about relationships and building those strong relationships. In my experience at Rocky, and going to go do an internship in the faith-based office in the Bush White House for my term in DC, and student assembly, and getting to kind of be part of the excitement that you brought to student assembly, Janos, was an incredible experience. And you never know where these people will take you. Like Amanda said, I was deployed to Iraq in this very interesting role, where I was responsible for incoming dignitaries and congressmen and senators. And Senator Warren came to visit us, to visit the troops, to see what was happening over there. And I'm standing on a sun-drenched tarmac in Erbil, Iraq, waiting outside a C-130 for Senator Warren to get off the plane. I knew she'd get off, but Sasha Baker, who is a Dartmouth grad, and she looks at me in my uniform and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I don't know. What are you doing here?" And you know, she was the lead policy advisor for Senator Warren. She's now in the White House doing cool stuff at the NSC. Michael Ellis, who was on my floor as one of my new students in 06, was at the National Security Council while I was in the White House. We had issues together. So making sure you develop those relationships and maintain those relationships, they'll come in handy. You know, if it requires doing a circuit with Janos and then helping usher him around CPAC so he can help push, you know, criminal justice reform, that's what it takes.
Yes, that is true. Jim absolutely did navigate me through some choppy waters there in Orlando, Florida, who, you know, where the convention was held in person, but hey, we all made it out. So Jim, you know, you knew a version of this question was coming. So I'm gonna start with you and then kick it to Amanda. But, you know, the question was about Trump's continued influence in the party and the impact that'll have moving forward. Some, you know, strong language was used to describe, you know, President Trump's, you know, refusal to legitimize the election and things of that nature. But I mean, I'll broaden it and just say, you know, you're obviously somebody who's worked in and around the Republican Party for a while. What is sort of, how do you see this playing out in terms of, for example, the treatment of people like Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, who by all accounts have been very strong Republicans, good on policy, but in this particular instance have deviated from the orthodoxy and are being punished for it?
Well, I would just say, you know, like I said before, I think everybody like has a view that their side is righteous and the other side isn't, and we need to avoid that, whatever side we're on. You know, you see it in the sort of the right's criticism of the cancel culture. It's like anyone who has a different view must be completely shamed and shunned and shut out and economically shut out by not being able to do business or do other things like that. And it's all very alarming. I think we should be more gracious towards each other in both parties. I think the vast majority of the folks in the Trump administration were well-meaning public servants who were trying to do the right thing. So I don't think it would be that different if you walked in terms of how you'd be treated than walking into an Obama White House or a Biden White House. I think that would surprise people because the media loves the palace intrigue. They love the caricatures. They love the demonization. I think there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And in terms of the president, what he decides to do in the party, I mean, I'm excited for new folks to come in and do cool things and see what happens. But I do think there's been a lot of good that's happened in terms of a focus on populism, a focus on blue-collar America that President Trump brought, that reanimated the Republican Party. I think that was something that we were more focused on sort of C-suite and corporate factors that were not animating people. So, and like I said, I think a lot of that's continuing, you know, getting out of endless wars and focusing on American trade and American industries is something that I think is broadly supported.
Thanks, Jim. And I'll say, you know, as somebody who protested the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq while at Dartmouth, I definitely am very pleased that both parties are turning away from that because that was an example of bipartisan cooperation in the worst manner during the early 2000s, in my view. Amanda, sort of same question, you know, how do you see the sort of this strain of the Republican Party debate playing out and affecting how Democrats, you know, in turn interact?
Yeah, and even out beyond just Democrats, even so, I run this organization called Supermajority. We came to be at, you know, the end of 2018, really got started. Sorry, my 3-year-old just found me. Got started in 2019 with this sort of mandate that Donald Trump is, you know, the worst, just like the epitome of everything that is bad for women in our country, and was the sort of easiest enemy, if you will, to then mobilize women to get involved in this past election cycle, to really, you know, to engage in a way to help elect Joe Biden. And it's interesting now, you know, we as an organization are trying to reinvent ourselves. You know, we were a new organization that got started, again, had this really easy mandate to get Donald Trump out of office. we have to now think about the world that doesn't have such an easy sort of enemy in Donald Trump. The progressive community is unlike it's ever been, and we are reinventing ourselves as an organization. And while, again, I would say Donald Trump made things, had a pretty horrible sort of impact on women beyond just policy, so just the way in which he treated and talked about women even, but the Mitch McConnell is probably a far greater enemy for women, and the way in which he has led the Republican Party, I think for the last whatever, like our generation, even, if you will, creates a real opportunity for organizations like mine to continue to be needed, necessary, and in existence, because we have to continue to fight back and sort of create that army on this side to push back on the right in that way. The other thing that really stands out to me just about the sort of new world that we're in, and what I do think, the rise of social media sort of came to be, or maybe made it maybe worse in the last 4 years, is just around the level of disinformation and misinformation, and how pervasive it is. So James talked about this a little bit, of people just like we are in our own sort of bubbles. Surround yourselves with people that are going to say and think the same way as you, but it's really easy to sort of manipulate or mislead people in this day and age with social media, with the way in which the Facebook algorithm works to feed certain people different narratives, which goes both ways. Can honestly reflect about that, but I think that that's something that weighs heavily on me, just thinking about sort of what the next couple of years will look like, and this, how easy it is, if you will, to put forth messages that aren't always honest.
Well, that's perhaps a good segue to one of the questions, which referenced Jim's remarks about challenges getting, even a veterans bill through. The question was, what are the obstacles that make change so hard? And I think the reason I think it's a nice segue is that obviously the temperature constantly escalating because of social media, because of cable platforms, is one of them. But from the vantage point that you both have had, and I'll start with you, Jim, can you just dig a little deeper about, like, I guess we heard about the 6,000 edits or whatever, but like, take any issue that would hypothetically have lots of support from both sides. What are the kind of things that make it so challenging to pass?
I think it's the entrenched interests, unfortunately, that have an outsized influence on politics in many ways. You think of one issue, which is reopening schools, right? This was something that was polling very well. It was something we wanted to do. Partially, I think, because of the partisanship and because of anything that Donald Trump said, people had to oppose. There was a lot of opposition to it when they were reopening schools in Denmark and Germany and other places that we consider, liberal paradises much earlier. There's still a lot of school systems that are still struggling to reopen, even though I think politicians and public servants in places like San Francisco or Manhattan would like to reopen schools. I think that's an example of sort of an entrenched interest group. Certainly on the left, they would say the same for NRA or other groups like that. But I think that's a big factor. I also just think there's an institutional factor. Look, a lot of this is by design. The process is slow. It's cumbersome. There's multiple different houses. There are multiple people who have to approve of things. And as a conservative, I appreciate that, but it's difficult when you're actually trying to get things done to make your way through all of that. But the original idea, I think, was that the product would ultimately be better at the other end.
Thanks, Jim. Amanda, and I'll say, folks, we've got about like 5 or 6 minutes left. So if you have a question, now's the time to get it in.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add. And I think James' point about bureaucracy is a real one, and makes governing really hard. And again, in any administration, but that's where I would just go back to the sort of like relationships matter. And if there is a person that can help us sort of navigate the partisan, it just like it is such a divide right now. I am optimistic about Joe Biden's ability to do that, more so than I think I remember a moment, I can reflect upon a moment, even in the Democratic sort of primary of like, of course, I would want somebody that is not a 75-year-old white man going into the office of the presidency when you have such an amazing candidate or pool of candidates who would bring such diversity and sort of a freshness, if you will, to this position of power. And at the end of the day, I think Joe Biden won for the very reasons that we've been talking about. And there is no person that's sort of better suited to lead in this moment. I truly believe that. And as many, I think that there are challenges, but I think there's a recognition of some of those more so than there have been in the past. And again, it takes more than just, talk. It requires some level of action, but I think you also have one of the most animated, activated communities of voters and activists in the country that are going to continue to push our leaders in ways that they've never been pushed before too. And so I think some people might also think about that and us people as a challenge in a time like this, but I think that's also one of the greatest sort of opportunities we have with just people being able to push our leaders in a way, and there being a real sort of public accountability on our leaders in that too.
Great, thank you. And great job juggling this whole situation. I'm very impressed. So we have one more question, and then if we have time, I'll just ask you each to say a word to close out. And it's about whether tech can potentially be a unifying force in government. I'll take a point to tell a quick story that the name Facebook used to come from, like, campuses would have literal Facebooks of people's photographs, and I remember, the student government was tasked with putting them out every year, and it always lost a ton of money. And one year when I was in my second year, I was in charge, I asked, is there a cheaper way we can do this, maybe online? And somebody on student government said, well, my ex-boyfriend, Mark, just did this thing at Harvard. And so we actually paid Mark Zuckerberg $1,000 to set up the Facebook for Dartmouth students. We were one of the first campuses in the country to do it. So anyway, that's how we
did it at the worst time, Janos, where it was like winter finals.
Yes, that was, yeah. And people, I didn't expect it to be so popular because obviously, I was really wrong about that. It became quite a sensation. Yeah, it was released right before finals. And the rest is history. So tech, it's been interesting to watch people in both parties taking on big tech, because there's reasons both progressive and conservative ideologies have reason to be concerned about monopolization, privacy, all kinds of things. So Jim, I'll start with you. Like, do you think tech could be an area where the two parties actually do some good work together?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's serious concerns on the right, particularly what I was talking about with cancel culture and just silencing voices, and the power that these companies have, their algorithms for Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And you've seen Senator Hawley's put out a bill to try and break up search functions from other functions in these big companies. And I think that's sort of the direction that a lot of folks in the Republican Party are looking towards. Now, ironically, there's still a very powerful libertarian movement or other elements that say, hey, no, these platforms have given ideas, widespread. We've been able to spread ideas that we never were able to before. We've expanded our voices. But I think generally the majority of the party is moving towards that populist view that big tech needs to be held accountable in some way, because they have so much power to just shut down and silence what they don't want to listen to. And like I said, conservatives believe that every institution is aligned against them. So what are we going to do about it?
Amanda?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would be so optimistic about tech at this point. Again, just thinking about sorry, she also is opposed to big tech, but just thinking about the role of disinformation and misinformation and how that can be weaponized in such a way right now. How the communities that are affected most are those, again, that are most deeply impacted by certain policies. And when you are misled with literally just straight up lies, and the sort of like ease and pervasiveness of that makes me really scared about the role of tech. I also think it's been interesting to see the sort of evolution of it as an organizing mechanism. For Barack Obama, even Twitter alone, right? Like I think in the 2008 election, he sent one tweet and it was like close, I think it was like when we won, versus, you know, what that looked like in 2012, and certainly the role that Twitter played in the for Donald Trump, just really dramatically different. But the way in which, you know, as an organizer, how organizations, how campaigns use these technologies, use Facebook, use Twitter to reach people. And I think Georgia, that election, from January is actually a really good example of when you limit political advertisements, how that can affect an election. And, you know, I felt like censored as a Democrat for not being able to even run a political ad in the Georgia Senate runoff. And I'm sure, you know, Republicans did too, but the way in which, you know, that was like a unilateral decision that somebody at Facebook made to limit political advertisements, which was for many of us in the sort of like operative state, the best way for us to reach a mass amount of people in a short amount of time over a holiday when you're trying to organize people to go vote. So I would say I'm more skeptical about the role of tech, who is making decisions about it and these different platforms right now, and how it can be just weaponized against certainly the more marginalized communities.
Great, thank you, thank you. So I'm just going to turn to each of you for 60 seconds to sort of just, you know, anything that I didn't ask you about, feel free to close out. But I just want to say to everybody watching, thank you so much for participating in this. Thank you so much for your questions. And thank you so much to Jim and Amanda for offering their unique insights on really, you know, how the apparatus of government works under enormous stress, and, you know, the great work that both of them have done. So Jim, just to close this out, any thoughts on like what people should be looking for in the next couple, you know, months or years ahead as we navigate these political waters?
No, I think, I think that we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with the infrastructure bill and the additional bills that come out. I would just, in closing, say thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy and honored to be part of this. Like I said, a lot of Dartmouth folks were in the past administration and don't get a whole lot of recognition for the work that they did. And I would just say to my fellow conservatives at Dartmouth who are students there now, just to continue to be brave and respectfully present your views, because people need the wide spectrum of views to be truly enlightened, to be truly educated. And I always appreciated the chance to represent that view at Dartmouth and to do so.
Thanks, Jim. Amanda?
Sorry, this is getting harder and harder. I would say that there are some real economic imperatives right now in our country to solve for right now. And when we frame them as such and communicate the sort of infrastructure, the job creation that is happening and needs to happen right now, I think that that is an opportunity for both parties to come together again to help us address some of these crises that have, we've faced long before the pandemic. The pandemic just sort of exposed them or exacerbated them, if you will. But I do think that there's, the more that we can talk about things as jobs and as infrastructure, the better we will be, and the more opportunity we have for both parties to come together and make real change. And I personally can't wait for that to happen. I think that, we, as much of a sort of Democrat as I am, I believe in, I think that's what, makes us a better, makes the government work. And I'm hopeful that we can, come together in that way. And I, again, think that there's nobody better to do that than Joe Biden. And this is sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity for him to lead. And then I also would say thank you. And James and Janos, it was really fun to get to talk to both of you too.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you all. Thanks, heartfelt thanks to all of you on the panel. It was lovely to have you back. We want to thank our distinguished alumni for sharing their expertise and views. Thanks for the lively discussion. I want to thank everybody who attended tonight, and we hope to see you next Thursday, May 6th at 7 o'clock. when Catherine A. McKinnon and Sarujaya Raman will discuss the impact of the sub-minimum wage on tipped workers. The event will be hosted by Professor Susan Bryson. Thanks so much to everyone for attending tonight, and we hope to see you next week.